A few years back, I got an email from a coach that was asking me for some strength conditioning advice, and he listed what he wanted to get done. It was including back squats and deadlift, and these type of activities. And I read this. That seems reasonable. This was American football players, and I'm reading along, thinking, yeah, I'll at least talk with this gentleman and see if I can help this coach, see if I can help him out. Got to the bottom of the email, and he was talking about a team of 11-year-olds, 11-year-old kids, and you want to do this type of activity. So my question is in this video, is barbell training a good idea for children, youth, adolescent athletes? Is it a good idea? Dr. Miller, maybe with some insight on, and so maybe some thought-provoking commentary on this idea if barbell training is okay for kids. Now, let me put some definitions out. Number one, when I say barbell training, I'm talking about back squat, bench, deadlift. I'm not talking about weight training in general. Dumbbells, trap bar, kettlebells. I'm not talking about that body weight. I know it's not weights, but in the traditional sense, but it's body weight. I'm not talking about that. I think that's fantastic for kids at any age. If, as the position standards usually recommend, it's supervised by somebody who knows what the heck they're doing, not the coach that's sitting over there drinking coffee and looking at the day's news while the kids are lifting. And not the dad who means well or the mom who means well, but they really don't know what the heck they're doing in the gym, and they just have their kids, doing things that they do, and they may not be doing right either. So there is an important caveat that is mentioned now in position stands. It should be. It's about proper supervision. Okay, but what I'm talking about is the barbell a good idea? Now, kids, I'm going to define real simply here as from the earliest age, somebody can pick up a barbell, let's say 6, right? Depending on the barbell, of course, like a technique barbell, all the way up to the age of 17. Now, I realize there's some big differences in development that are occurring there, puberty and adolescence. I get it. And there's going to be athletes that fall along, the error bar of the average, okay, at every single developmental time point. I get it. But in general, is the barbell a good training device, okay, for kids? Now, I love the barbell. I'm a big barbell fan. I coach Olympic style weightlifting. I've competed in powerlifting. I've lifted the barbell since I was probably too young to know what I was doing. And that's what this video is about, in assessing if the barbell really is an appropriate tool for kids. All right, so let's get into this a little bit. So there's a study, and I'll put it up here, that a couple years ago that was done, a study over 3 years' time, analyzing the average age of these participants. There's 12 of them, 11-year-olds, and you can see this online. So I'm not putting up some copyrighted thing, but basically I looked at the spinal health, lower back health in particular, of these athletes who were weightlifting. Now, weightlifting was not defined. I looked on the university site. I couldn't find if there was an Olympic weightlifting team or was a powerlifting team, or I'm assuming it was Olympic style weightlifting, but I could be assuming incorrectly. These athletes were training 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's a lot of training for a young athlete. So let's keep that in mind too. I don't think most coaches would not advocate for that type of intense frequency of training. We have no idea the intensity of training. We have no idea the exercises that they were doing. So I want to be very careful not to read too much into this study. It's just a point of interest as we were talking about barbell usage. Okay. Now, my concern that's happened over the years is that when this whole idea of epiphyseal plate fractures and growth plate fractures was kind of dismissed, and we said, well, that's just some case studies. It scares parents, and I would agree with that. It was overblown, and it did scare people from having their kids lift. And I'm gonna be honest with you. In retrospect, some of that may have been a good idea. I know that may be kind of controversial to say, especially somebody's in strength conditioning and education and weightlifting, but I don't think most kids, and this is my opinion based on the study that I put up as a minor point, but just watching kids lift, watching them development, watching coaches coach weightlifting in young kids, both good and bad. My concern is that we have just said, well, oh, okay, so weightlifting and powerlifting and using the barbell is okay for kids. Let's just have at it because they can max out. We say that in position. Yeah, they can max out, absolutely, as long as it's supervised. Here's the deal: you have small skeletons, underdeveloped skeletons that you're placing loads on that the athlete may not be able to stabilize yet. I mean, one of the things like in weightlifting I see quite a bit, and believe me, I'm not preaching to anybody. I'm guilty of doing this too. I've caught myself many times using barbells with younger athletes at a rate that was too quick. And it wasn't like they were getting their souls crushed necessarily, but it was the wrong thing to do at that time. And I backed up and took the barbell off of them. Younger athletes, I don't use the barbell. Even weightlifters, we don't use the barbell unless we're doing the weightlifting movements, and those movements are done correctly, and the progression is very slow. There's no hurry, right? And so, that's kind of the point here. But my concern is when I, say, oh, we've said, okay, go ahead and use the barbell, but it's like, okay, just have at it. Okay, let's slap the bar on them and get after it. Even if a coach knows what they're doing, egos play a part. That's where I got in trouble. I have an ego as a coach. I want to be successful. I want this athlete to be successful. I want them to be happy. I want to, see them be successful as their coach. But that's not the right motivation when working with kids. Even if you have some phenom, we still have to be very careful in how we progress it. And I've seen coaches do it well. I'm not saying all coaches have done it poorly. But it needs to be done very, very carefully, because I've also seen then junior athletes in the barbell sports either injured or burned out, and they won't have anything to do with the barbell, and their career's over. Okay, and if you really look at it, a lot of these athletes that started a little bit later with weightlifting and the barbell tend to be the ones that last into their mid-20s and later, and they end up being healthier. And the barbell is a wonderful thing, but it'll beat you up. Anybody knows has moved the barbell knows that. I know that very, very well. Okay, so this would be my advice for those first that aren't barbell coaches. Number one, don't use the barbell. If you can, don't use it. You don't need to. If you're training a bunch of soccer players or you're just doing strength conditioning, okay, you don't need to do it. Kids are easy to coach for sports performance. They really are in terms of the physiology, like the physiological outcome. Now, keeping them motivated and focused, that's a different story. But I'm talking about how to get them stronger, how to get them to jump higher, how to get them to run faster. This is easy. They're already growing, so you got that in your favor. All you have to do is add a little bit of stimulus. And a hex bar, trap bar, is one of my favorite tools for kids because they can step in between the weight. There's still spinal compression, sure, but the bar isn't directly on their spine. Okay? When we bench, their arms aren't fixed on the barbell. With barbells, for a lot of kids, it's hard to control, even if you coach them well. It's too heavy if you don't have the right barbells. Like if you only have men's barbells, bench press is a bad idea because you're going to have all kinds of, shoulder placement that isn't good. They can't stabilize the barbell. That's the point. Okay. And if a barbell is unstable, like in a squat, they're not going to be able to do the exercise properly anyway. They're just going to end up hurting their backs. Okay. That extra compression over time, why do it? And that would be my point. It's like, well, we can. Well, that's the wrong thing to say. It's not we can, it's should we and do we have to? In fact, if you have a gym or you're a school, it's a lot cheaper to buy some adjustable dumbbells than it is a whole set of barbells and plates, okay, and a squat rack. I mean, you can buy a whole bunch of lighter dumbbells and do some amazing single leg work with these kids. Again, hex bars are cheaper if you want to get plates and barbells. These are all fantastic tools. Again, the hex bar allows you to step in between the weights, so the bar is not in front of the athlete. It's just a lot easier on the back. It's easier to teach if you have a large group of athletes. It's easier to coach them. If you're a personal trainer, it's easier to get them to cue and learn how to set their back properly. And they don't have the problems of rate of rise as bad where the hips are flying out because the bar isn't in front of them, so on and so forth. Most kids can't even move their own body weight well anyway without having some sort of movement error that could be bad for their knees. Okay, if I'm thinking about lower body exercise. So my advice for the non-barbell coach is don't use the barbell unless you absolutely have to, like that's your only device. And even then I would question it. Don't use it to build strength. Power, easy. Have them do some weighted anything, dumbbell, kettlebell, the trap bar, and then jump, plyos. I mean, kids are in general, kids are pretty sedentary. I work with a lot of kids. Their mobility is terrible now because all they do is sports. So they do sports and they sit down and play video games and go to school. That's it. And so their activity level has been significantly reduced. In general, has been significantly reduced. And so their mobility is awful. So regaining mobility, motor control, teaching them how to move, that is going to take some time. And if you can do that alone, you're going to see gains of performance. When I was working with kids a little bit more than I do now, I look like a freaking genius all the time, but I wasn't doing anything spectacular. We were doing I would do 3 sets of 8 hex bar, not even close to failure. Okay. And then they do some plyos and they would add 2.5 inches to their vertical jump. I mean, it's that simple with kids. There is no reason to use a barbell and crush these kids' souls under a barbell. Okay. Now for the barbell athletes, I work with youth in barbells. This would be my advice, and I would scale this a little bit more. For kids that are under 13, they don't squat with the barbell. They just don't. There's other ways to build strength. If strength is the game, they don't need to squat. They're going to get that activity in through the actual Olympic style weightlifting. And I'm talking about Olympic style weightlifting. Sorry, I said barbell sport. Olympic style weightlifting. They don't need to do any of that. Okay. Even as they transition through puberty and beyond, I would only squat once a week, and I would front squat almost exclusively. And I would front squat almost exclusively all the way up until they're 16 or 17 years old, and even then evaluate if a back squat is appropriate at that time. Because the front squat allows for a little bit more failure, and it's still sport specific. It loads the spine, but at least the spine is stacked a lot better if done properly than with the back squat. I realize there's upper back challenges, but that's a good thing for the sport. They're going to get better at stabilizing their spine. But I'd still only squat once a week. I wouldn't squat these athletes more than that. They can do other types of squatting, some of these other things, hex bar, dumbbells, things like that. But just having them crawl under a barbell and getting crushed is not a good idea. Even if you're laying back on the loads and being responsible with the loading, I feel it. Again, it's my opinion that looking at the physiology and the rate of increase in strength that these kids can occur, there was no reason for them to squat more than once a week. Okay, the downside is greater than the upside. Now, once they get a little bit older, like I said, 16, 17, 18, their skeleton's a little bit more developed, right? Now you can start to load them and get a little crazy. The point is, there's plenty of time to load these athletes. There's plenty of time. I know there's a fine balance here in youth athletes of being successful and wanting them to see success, but not and understanding who they are, that they're kids still. And so, especially when you have a phenom, I've never had a phenom like that. I imagine that's incredibly challenging for those coaches. And again, I've seen coaches handle it well. I've seen coaches not handle it very well. I've been at weightlifting meets that, the little 11-year-old girl is crying because the load just crushed her soul, and the coach calls from her weight because his ego says I have to break a state record. What the heck, right? That's frustrating to watch. Okay. So when it comes to barbell sports, I would be careful. Powerlifting, I'm going to say something that's probably going to ruffle a few feathers. I don't think kids should powerlift until they are in high school. Even then, the coach that is in high school should know what they're doing. Okay. I realize there's kids that are doing powerlifting early on, and people argue with me on that. I like the sport. It's not anything against the sport, but it's a brutal sport. It's brutal. It's brutal on the body. Even done well, even if supportive things are done well, it's a brutal sport on the body. It's really hard on the body. And so taking a child, taking an individual that is very young and throwing them in the barbell in the way that we do, and pulling barbells and pushing the barbell pressing the barbell is not a good idea. Okay, that'd be my advice. Now, you can just delete this video now and worry about it, just ignore it. But I'm telling you, over the long haul, the damage that is done starts to accrue, and eventually these individuals, not always, but they can start to see problems then, even in their early 20s. Okay? If there's a back injury, I hurt my back this week, it's not like, it'll be fine. Something went wrong there. That should be a red flag. Like, hey, this is a big deal. Okay? This is a big deal. All right? So, again, I put up the study. I think I went through some of the limitations of it. Again, things weren't poorly defined, but you can see some of the pictures of disc health. And I'm not saying this is going to happen. I'm not saying it's absolute. I'm trying to be careful to stay out of absolutes, but when at all possible, why expose kids to the barbell when they don't have to be exposed to the barbell? And being honest that if you have a strong kid, you don't need to crush their soul necessarily just because there's these position stands that say it's okay to load kids heavy. We don't really have a lot of data we don't have any that I know of that's followed these kids in their 20s and 30s and looked at their backs. Now we're starting to get some data to look back at the experiences of some of these individuals that have back injuries. But you know, we just need to be careful. All right. I think we need to be careful. So take this for what you want. You can comment below and say you're an idiot, and maybe that's what you'll do. But remember that these kids are people. They're not little people. They're a different development stage of people. And if we don't keep that in mind, we're ended up hurting kids for the sake of sports. Sports are bad for you. They're bad for anybody. They're wonderful. I love sports. I'm not saying don't do sports, but I am saying for kids, when it comes to the barbell, I think we can avoid the barbell at times. And if we just check our egos as parents, as coaches, and we can make sure kids are, in a place that they're not going to hurt themselves. At least with powerlifting, like I mentioned before, wait till high school. Even then, I think it's a little bit out of control, especially with boys. They tend to their egos get out of control, which is a whole other topic. But at least they haven't incurred any damage up until that point. Hopefully a little bit stronger overall, and they can handle those loads at that time. Okay, I'll quit rambling. I could talk about this for a long time. Made this video way too long as it is. I hope you found it useful.